It begins on a dark stretch of asphalt in Los Angeles, just after midnight. Streetlights hum. The city breathes quietly, and a single decision, small, almost forgettable, sets history in motion. Rodney Glenn King is driving home. He is not a king in the way power understands kings. He is a construction worker, a father, a man who has learned through years of living in America how easily the wrong glance or the wrong tone can turn deadly. Tonight, when police lights flare behind him, he makes a choice born from fear. He doesn't pull over right away. He drives, not to escape justice, but to avoid it, because Rodney King knows something the law never writes down. Sometimes stopping is more dangerous than running. The chase doesn't last long. Helicopters slice the air above, patrol cars flood the streets, and when Rodney finally stops, he steps out slowly. He lies face down, hands out, body still. He does everything he's been told will keep him alive, and still nothing stops what comes next. Batons rise and fall again and again. Boots land where breath should be. Commands blur into screams. This is not the sound of arrest. It is the sound of domination, of power reminding a man how small he is allowed to be. Rodney King is underestimated in the most dangerous way possible. Not as a threat, but as someone who doesn't matter. The officers stand over him like judges with no courtroom, executioners with no sentence, and for a moment the night swallows it all. No witnesses, no accountability, just another black body on the pavement. Except this time, someone is watching from an apartment balcony nearby. George Holliday lifts a camcorder, bulky and analog, a device that doesn't care about rank or reputation. It only records what it sees, and what it sees will shake the world. The tape is raw, unsteady, brutal. It captures baton strikes that do not stop when Rodney stops moving. It captures officers stepping back, then stepping in again, as if violence itself needs rehearsal. It captures something America had long denied. Not a rumor, not a statistic, but proof. When the footage airs, the nation recoils. This is no longer Rodney King's private nightmare. It is America's public reckoning. The powerful figures move fast. Police spokesmen speak calmly and carefully. Words like protocol and resistance float through press conferences. The officers are framed as professionals forced into a difficult moment. And Rodney is framed as a problem that created his own pain. This is the old story, the familiar one, but the tape doesn't flinch. Suddenly, the underdog has an ally more powerful than any badge. Visibility. Rodney King, battered and bruised, becomes the center of storm he never asked for. Cameras follow him. Microphones wait for his voice, and the irony cuts deep. Only after being nearly beaten to death is he finally seen. The case goes to trial, and the tension tightens like a noose. The defense slows the tape down, frame by frame, freeze after freeze, turning motion into justification and pain into pixels. Each baton strike is rebranded as reasonable. Each cry becomes noncompliance. And the jury watches violence dissected until it no longer looks violent at all. This is a power shift no one expected, because the question is no longer what happened. The question becomes who gets to decide what it means. When the verdict comes back, the words hit like a second beating. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. The city explodes. Los Angeles burns with a fury that has been simmering for generations. Fires light the sky. Sirens wail without pause. And people are no longer asking for justice. They're screaming that they were never meant to have it. In the middle of the chaos, Rodney King steps forward. His body still carries the scars, but his voice carries something else entirely. Can we all get along? It is not a demand for forgiveness. It is a plea for survival. A man broken by violence asking a nation to stop breaking itself. The world listens and doesn't know how to answer because justice, as delivered, feels hollow. Yet the story doesn't end there. Behind the scenes, federal prosecutors move quietly. Civil rights charges are filed. A second trial unfolds, less televised and more surgical. And this time the focus isn't on whether Rodney resisted, but on whether the officers violated his rights. 2 of them are convicted. The sentence is not long. The punishment is not equal to the pain, but the message is unmistakable. For the first time, the system blinks. Rodney King, the man once left bleeding on the pavement, has forced America to look at itself and flinch. The tape becomes a turning point. Police departments rewrite policies. Civilian video becomes a weapon of accountability. And a phrase caught on camera gains new meaning. And yet dramatic irony lingers, because Rodney never truly escapes the shadow of that night. Fame does not heal trauma. Money does not erase memory. And the same country that watched him suffer struggles to protect him from suffering again. His life becomes a reminder that justice can be partial, delayed, and devastatingly incomplete. Still, something irreversible has happened. Power has shifted. Authority no longer stands completely unchallenged in the dark. Brutality is no longer guaranteed to vanish in the paperwork, and one man, underestimated and nearly erased, changed the rules simply by surviving long enough to be seen. The lesson cuts deep and uncomfortable. Justice does not begin in courtrooms. It begins with witnesses. And as the screen fades to black, a final question hangs in the air, heavy and unresolved. If one videotape could expose the truth, how many stories never made it to the light? Because in part 2, we follow what happened after cameras turned off and ask whether America truly learned the lesson Rodney King paid for in blood. The fires eventually die down. Smoke clears. Sirens fade into memory. And America, exhausted by its own reflection, slowly turns a page. But for Rodney King, there is no next chapter yet. Only the long echo of that night and the weight of what followed. When the cameras leave South Central Los Angeles, they do not follow Rodney home to quiet spaces where trauma waits. They do not film the nights he wakes up gasping or the way sudden noises make his body tense like the batons are coming back. History has already taken what it needed from him. The rest is his to carry alone. Money comes, but it comes with conditions. A civil settlement. Millions of dollars meant to compensate for shattered bones and a shattered sense of safety. The headlines call it a win. The public calls it justice. But money does not unbreak trust. And it does not teach a man how to live after the world has watched him almost die. Rodney is handed fame without a map. Every smile is suspicious. Every stranger knows his name, but not his pain. He becomes a symbol trapped inside his own body. The officers fade into anonymity, protected by procedure and time. Some return to quiet lives. Others carry convictions that barely graze the surface of what they took. The imbalance lingers, sharp and unresolved. Rodney, meanwhile, is expected to heal in public, to be grateful, to represent hope. But hope is a heavy thing to carry when you are still learning how to stand without fear. America congratulates itself. Policies are revised. Training manuals are rewritten. Dash cameras appear, then body cameras, each one marketed as progress. And yet, beneath the surface, the old instincts remain. The footage of Rodney King becomes a reference point, a warning, a benchmark, but also a shield. We're better now, the country says. That was then, but then keeps happening. Rodney drifts. The attention that once burned bright grows colder, and with it comes isolation. He struggles with addiction, with anger, with a deep, quiet depression that follows public trauma. Each stumble becomes a headline. Each mistake framed as a personal failure rather than a predictable wound. The same system that once brutalized him now watches him fall and asks why he can't get back up. And still, the irony refuses to let go. Because everywhere Rodney goes, cameras are closer than ever. Phones in pockets, lenses on dashboards, strangers recording strangers. The world he helped create now documents everything, except the slow, invisible damage done after the fact. His legacy moves forward without him, reshaping policing, activism, and public awareness, while his own life feels stuck in the shadow of one moment frozen on tape. Years pass. New names join the conversation. New videos circulate. New protests erupt. Each time, Rodney King's name is invoked like a ghost, a reminder where it all began. But reminders do not equal resolution. The question lingers unanswered. If the evidence was undeniable then, why does denial survive now? In 2012, Rodney King is found at the bottom of a swimming pool. The reports are careful with their words. Accidental, drowning, toxicology. The language of closure tries to wrap itself around a life that never truly closed its wounds. The news breaks quietly. No riots. No national address. Just another update scrolling across a screen. And yet, the silence is loud. Because Rodney King did not just survive a beating. He exposed a truth the country still wrestles with. He proved that power fears witnesses, that cameras can bend history, and that justice, once seen, can never be unseen. But he also proved something darker, that being a catalyst does not guarantee being protected by the change you create. The final power shift is subtle but permanent. Every time a video surfaces, every time a badge is questioned, every time a voice says we saw it, Rodney King is there. Not in the frame, but in the foundation. His pain became evidence. His survival became precedent. The lesson, uncomfortable and unavoidable, settles in justice is not a moment. It is a process. And the process is cruel to the people who started. Rodney King asked the world if it could get along. And instead, the world learned how to watch itself more closely. Whether it learned how to be better remains an open question. And that question hangs there unresolved as the story fades out once more. Because if one man's suffering could change how truth is seen, what will it take for truth to finally change how power behaves? And in the final chapter, we ask the question no court ever answered. Was Rodney King a victim of one night, or of a system that never stopped watching him fall? The world likes clean endings, courtroom verdicts, memorial dates, a sense that a story has reached its conclusion. But the truth about Rodney King is that his story never learned how to end. It only learned how to echo. Long after his name stopped leading the headlines, it stayed buried inside the language of power and protest, surfacing every time another video surfaced, every time another body hit the ground, and the question rose again. How much proof is enough? By the late 1990s and early 2000s, cameras were everywhere. Dash cams, security cams, then phones. Each new lens promised clarity, and each new clip delivered familiarity. Different streets, different names, same posture, same commands, same silence after the violence. And each time, the footage was compared back to one moment in 1991, as if Rodney King had become a measuring stick for pain. This was worse than Rodney King. This was just like Rodney King. This was supposed to have changed after Rodney King. But power adapts faster than memory. Police departments learned the language of reform. Words like de-escalation, community policing. Transparency entered the public vocabulary. Task forces formed. Panels convened. Apologies issued. And still, the pattern held. Accountability arrived slowly, selectively, and often too late to matter. The system had not been dismantled. It had been refined. Rodney King's greatest contribution, unintentional and unpaid, was that he taught the public how to watch, how to freeze a frame, how to question a narrative, how to distrust the first official statement. He didn't give America answers. He gave it skepticism. And skepticism, once learned, is impossible to unlearn. Yet even that gift came at a cost. Because the more the world learned to see, the more it asked why seeing still wasn't enough. Why video after video could circulate without conviction. Why justice felt informative, provisional, fragile. The dramatic irony deepened. The very tool that exposed the truth also became the battlefield, where truth was endlessly debated, context was stretched, frames were isolated, time was slowed until reality lost its urgency. What happened to Rodney King didn't just repeat, it evolved. His name became shorthand, a reference, a footnote spoken quickly before moving on to the next case. And that may be the cruelest turn of all, when a human life becomes comparison rather than a caution. In classrooms, his story is taught as history. In documentaries, it is framed as a turning point. In protests, as words, can we all get along, are replayed with new weight, not as naivete, but as a question the country still refuses to answer honestly. Getting along was never the issue. Getting equal was. And somewhere inside that realization, the final power shift takes shape, because the public no longer waits for permission to believe its own eyes. Authority no longer owns the first draft of truth. Every citizen with a phone is now a potential witness, a potential historian. This is Rodney King's shadow legacy, stretching far beyond his lifetime. shaping a world where silence is harder to maintain. But shadows do not bring peace. The cycle continues. Outrage flares. Promises are made. Time passes. Names change. The distance between exposure and consequence remains dangerously wide. And that gap, the space where justice should live, is where Rodney King's story still breathes. The echo grows louder with each generation that realizes progress without protection is just repetition with better branding. That being seen is not the same as being saved. That survival does not guarantee safety, dignity, or rest. So the story circles back to its beginning. A man on a dark road. A decision made out of fear. A system ready to respond with force. Only now, the world is watching from every angle. The question is no longer whether the truth will be recorded. The question is what will be done with it. Because Rodney King proved that exposure can crack the surface of power. But Part 4 asks a question that still haunts the nation. When the truth is undeniable, why does justice still feel optional? And in the next chapter, we confront the system head-on, following the line from one videotape to a nation forever caught between witnessing injustice and stopping it, where optimism goes to die. Not loudly, not in flames, but quietly, inside policy binders, press releases, and carefully chosen words. After Rodney King, America promised itself that it crossed a line it would never step over again, that the images burned into the public conscience were enough to force permanent change. But the system does not collapse when it is exposed. It studies the exposure. It learns, and then it adapts. On paper, everything looks different. Police departments expand training hours. New rules are written. Oversight committees are announced with serious faces and hopeful language. Cameras are mounted on dashboards, then on chests, each one introduced as a safeguard against history repeating itself. The message is clear. Transparency will protect us from ourselves. But transparency without consequence becomes theater. And theater is something power understands very well. The first lesson the system absorbs is this. Outrage has a lifespan. It burns hot, then cools. It demands answers, then moves on. Time, not truth, becomes the most effective defense. In the Rodney King trial, the strategy was simple but devastating. Slow the footage down until urgency disappeared. Frame by frame, violence was transformed into interpretation. Pain was dissected into moments, and moments were stripped of meaning. That tactic did not disappear with a verdict. It became doctrine. Years later, as more videos surface, the same choreography unfolds. Statements are issued expressing concern. Investigations are launched, often by the same institutions under scrutiny. Officers are placed on administrative leave, a phrase that sounds like accountability but functions as suspension of outrage. The system never says nothing. It says just enough to survive the moment. This is what it means for the system to answer itself. Rodney King's case taught power that admitting error is not as dangerous as admitting pattern. Individual acts can be condemned. Structures must be protected. So the narrative is carefully narrowed. This officer failed. That moment escalated. This situation was unfortunate. Each case is framed as an anomaly, never a symptom. By the time the language hardens into legal findings, the story has already been fragmented beyond recognition. The irony is cruel. There has never been more evidence, never more angles, more audio, more timestamps. And yet, accountability remains elusive. The presence of video, once a threat, becomes a battlefield. Lawyers debate pixels instead of principles. Experts analyze body positioning while ignoring imbalance of power. The human instinct to react to violence is buried beneath technical definitions of reasonableness. The same beating that once shocked the nation can now be argued into neutrality. Communities feel this disconnect viscerally. They know what they are seeing. They recognize the posture, the tone, the escalation that precedes force. Their lived experience fills in the context the courtroom demands be stripped away. And so they respond in the only way history has shown them works, by refusing to be quiet. Protests are not born from chaos. They are born from stalled answers. They are the sound of patience running out. Every march carries a memory of 1992, whether spoken or not. Every chant is a reminder that the lesson of Rodney King was not learned by those in power. It was learned by those who have to live with its consequences. The system responds predictably. It calls for calm. It condemns destruction while carefully avoiding the destruction that sparked the unrest. It frames protest as disorder, never as evidence. In doing so, it shifts focus away from the original harm and toward the response to it. This redirection is not accidental. It is survival instinct institutionalized. And yet, something fundamental has changed since Rodney King. The public no longer relies solely on official explanations. Memory has become decentralized. Videos are saved, shared, archived. Patterns are identified outside courtrooms and police reports. Independent journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens compile timelines the system would prefer remain scattered. The monopoly on narrative has been broken, even if the monopoly on consequence remains. This creates a new tension, one the system cannot fully control. Authority can still delay justice, but it can no longer erase doubt. Every time an explanation feels rehearsed, every time footage contradicts a statement, trust erodes further. The gap between what is said and what is seen widens, and in that gap, legitimacy begins to crack. Rodney King stands at the center of this shift, whether acknowledged or not. His beating was not just an act of violence. It was a demonstration of how easily truth could be buried, until it couldn't. The system learned to survive that moment, but it never escaped it. Every modern case is haunted by the question his footage introduced. If we saw this and still failed him, what does justice actually require? Chapter 4 forces an uncomfortable realization. Reform does not equal transformation. Cameras do not equal courage. Policies do not equal protection. Change that does not threaten power is tolerated. Change that demands surrender is resisted at every turn. This is not cynicism. It is pattern recognition. The system answers itself because it was designed to. It investigates itself, judges itself, and often absolves itself. This circular logic is presented as order, as stability, as rule of law. But for those living under its weight, it feels like a closed room with no exits, only explanations. And still, the story is not static. Each exposure chips away at the illusion of inevitability. Each public record becomes harder to ignore. Each generation grows more fluent in the language of accountability, less willing to accept delay as justice. The system may be intact, but it is no longer unchallenged. Chapter 4 closes not with resolution, but with a reckoning. Rodney King's legacy is not that the system failed once. It is that the system revealed how it survives failure. Understanding that truth is the first step toward dismantling the mechanisms that protect power at the expense of people. Because the final question lingers, heavy and unavoidable. If undeniable truth is not enough, then what force is required to turn exposure into consequence? And in the next chapter, that question will be confronted directly, as the story moves from witnessing injustice to demanding the kind of change that power cannot simply wait out the realization no system wants spoken out loud. Exposure was never the end game. Rodney King proved that truth can surface, but he also proved something far more dangerous to power. That truth alone does not enforce justice. It only creates a choice. And for decades, the system chose delay. By now, the pattern is unmistakable. Video emerges. Outrage follows. Institutions respond. Time passes. Consequences thin out. The cycle resets. But something is different in this final chapter. Something that did not exist in 1991. The patience is gone. The language has changed. The public is no longer asking to be convinced. It is demanding to be answered. Rodney King's beating cracked the door. What followed kicked it wider with every new name added to the roll call of memory. The power shift that began with one shaky camcorder has matured into collective awareness. People no longer argue about whether brutality exists. They argue about why it is still protected. That is not a moral debate. It is a structural one. This is where power begins to feel pressure it cannot easily absorb, because accountability is no longer framed as punishment for individuals alone. It is framed as dismantling systems that produce the same outcomes again and again. Qualified immunity, union contracts, internal investigations, prosecutorial reluctance. Each layer once hidden behind complexity is now spoken aloud, named, challenged. The conversation Rodney King never asked to start has become unavoidable, and still resistance hardens. Power responds the only way it knows how, by warning of chaos, by framing reform as danger, by suggesting that safety and accountability are opposites, not partners. This argument has been used before, every time the hierarchy feels threatened, but it lands differently now, because the evidence has accumulated, because people remember how long they were told to wait. The dramatic irony is complete. The system that once claimed Rodney King's beating was an exception now spends its energy defending why exceptions keep happening. The mask slips not through confession, but through repetition. Justice, in this chapter, is no longer imagined as a verdict. It is imagined as prevention, as removing the conditions that make another Rodney King inevitable. This is a demand power fears most, because it cannot be satisfied with symbolic wins. It requires surrendering control. Rodney King never lived to see this moment fully take shape. He never saw a world where cameras are expected, where silence is suspicious, where official statements are immediately interrogated. He also never saw the cost of being the first proof. His life stands as a warning carved into history. Being right does not mean being protected, and yet his legacy refuses to fade. Every time a witness hits record, Rodney King is there. Every time someone asks why accountability feels optional, Rodney King is there. Not as a victim frozen in time, but as the beginning of a long, unfinished sentence America is still trying to complete. The final power shift is not about the system changing itself. It is about being forced to. It is about sustained pressure that does not dissipate when headlines change. It is about memory refusing to be buried. That is, the reckoning power cannot delay forever. Justice is not a gift granted by authority. It is a demand enforced by persistence. Rodney King showed the world what happens when truth breaks through silence. What happens next depends on whether the world is willing to do more than watch. The screen fades, not to black, but to a question left deliberately unanswered, because it now belongs to the audience. If witnessing injustice is no longer enough, what are we willing to dismantle to stop it? In the end, Rodney King is not remembered for the chase, or the verdicts, or even the riots that followed. He is remembered for a moment when a man lay on the ground and the world finally saw what had always been happening in the dark. A moment when denial became impossible. A moment that changed how truth entered the public eye. But history is cruel in the way it chooses its witnesses. Rodney did not ask to become proof. He did not ask to carry the weight of a nation's awakening on his broken body. He only wanted to make it home alive. And that is the quiet tragedy at the heart of the story. That a man had to almost lose his life for the truth to be believed. When the camera stopped rolling, the pain did not. It followed him into silence, into memory, into a life forever split in two, before the beating and after the world watched. He became a symbol people debated, quoted, and eventually moved on from. But symbols don't bleed. Rodney did, and still his question echoes. Can we all get along? Not as weakness, not as surrender, but as a man asking if his suffering meant something. Asking if the truth he revealed would be enough to save the next person and the one after that. Asking if being seen would finally make being human safer. The answer has never been simple. Justice came late and incomplete. Change came uneven and fragile. But something irreversible was born that night on a Los Angeles street. A truth that refuses to stay buried. A witness that cannot be unrecorded. A memory that still burns. Every time a camera shakes in the dark. Every time a voice says, "We saw it." Every time silence is broken by evidence. Rodney King is there. Not as a headline. Not as a case study. But as a reminder of the cost of truth and the responsibility it leaves behind. His life tells us this. Justice does not arrive all at once. Sometimes it begins with pain. Sometimes it begins with survival. Sometimes it begins with one man on the ground and one camera brave enough to keep rolling. And as the story ends, the emotion lingers, not in anger alone, but in resolve. Because the world can never unknow what it saw that night. And the question Rodney King left us with still waits for an honest answer. If we could see the truth, how dare we look away now?